Season 1, Episode 14, Picking Your Plot Structure.
Hello and welcome to How to Survive Until You're Published, the podcast, because if you're drowning in words, and so are we, and you might as well not do it alone. So last week, we talked about how to match your character to your plot, kind of as a transition episode, but this week we are going to be diving right into plot itself. So Megan, first off, how do you define plot?
So plot has been defined by the internet as the main events of a play, novel, movie, or similar work. Devised and presented by the writer as an interrelated sequence. In a literary work, film, or other narrative, the plot is a sequence of events in which each event affects the next one through the principle of cause and effect. So it's also defined as like devising the sequence of events in a play, novel, or movie to like get the character to act.
Yeah. So it's just what happens.
Yes.
And how they affect each other.
Yep, exactly. Which I feel like most people know that, but
Yeah,
you know.
No, it's great. I love it.
So Amy, what's the difference between a plotter and a pantser?
Yeah, I love this question. So we've all probably heard the plotter and pantser thing.
I think we've talked a little bit about it on here before.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. So, but I feel like, yeah, it definitely needs to be talked about. So a pantser, by, literary definition, not really, but is just somebody that writes by the seat of their pants. So there are some famous authors out there that are pantsers that can sit down and just write and get to the end and are like, here you go, it's beautiful. But
probably after a few drafts. But,
yeah, probably, yeah. And then a plotter is somebody that has to really structure out each and everything, which is Megan.
Yes,
100%.
I am a plotter.
I love it. No, she plots out. She like summarizes each of her scenes before she starts writing, which can be very, very helpful. So
there's also the in-between planter, who's someone who will kind of fly by the seat of their pants and just write, and then they do a little bit of plotting, and then they just go for it again. And it's kind of a mix, and I feel like that's kind of what you are.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I kind of do a little bit of both. I think it's also learning how you plot.
Yes.
A lot of people, I feel like, maybe start out as pantsers.
Yeah.
But it's because it takes a lot of effort to learn how you plot and how you do it yourself. And so
neither one is better. It's just whatever works for you, honestly.
Yeah, and it just takes some practice, and I would definitely say try both. Because as a pantser, you can write by inspiration, and it helps you to kind of stay motivated and to keep going and to feel inspired. But a plotter can help you actually make sure your story makes sense too.
So why would you care about plot as a pantser?
So for me personally, I loved pantsing at the beginning just because I could just write and I could get the feel of my characters. I could understand and see how they would react to something. I would like be writing and be like, oh, what if this happens? And I just like throw that in and then see what my character does. It helped me to learn who my character is. But as I kept going and wanted to develop a solid story that had each of those cause and effects and like would build upon each other and help my character actually reach
it's like making it more
goal.
Cohesive.
Yeah, it was at that point where I was like, I need some structure. And my ADHD brain was taught young to try to be organized, and it's my mother succeeded to an extent about helping me with that. And so I kind of, as I've started discovering how I plot, I've kind of started to latch onto it. Like, okay, this is a bit of a comfort level of me making sure I outline and
kind of know the big
structure.
events at least, and it's the in between you figure out, right?
Yeah. So that's for me is it's become something that's been helpful for me to understand my story as like a whole. So Megan, why is it helpful for you to like have a structure in general?
So I'm probably a little bit OCD, which is why my brain just needs it to organize ideas and thoughts. And also just sometimes I don't have a lot of time to write, working full time and like just with everything else going on in life. So I like to be able to know what I'm sitting down to write when I'm approaching my story and like what exactly it is I need to be thinking of. Because when I'm doing other tasks throughout the day, I can be thinking of those scenes because I already know what's going to come next. And I kind of know those big points like, okay, this is going to be the cause, this is the effect it needs to have, and I can fill out the scene from there. So it does help me to kind of have a little summary of each plot point, because I do, like she said, get down into the scene by scene level in my chapters too, with the cause and effect and like action and reaction. But having a little paragraph summary of the plot when I sit down to write, one, it helps my brain kind of calm down and get into the writing flow and focus, rather than seeing a blank screen and being like, oh no, what do I write? I'm like, oh, okay, so I know that this, and this need to be accomplished in this chapter, and this is kind of what's going on and what comes in next. So I have a little short summary and snippet, and then I can type it out and make it actually into a story, not just this like blurb.
I feel like with that too, what's kind of helped me is as my plot changes, because I mean it changes a lot, especially when you're like revamping stuff and rediscovering your character, having a scene by scene or just a plot structure outline, you can go change that instead of feeling like you have to go back through your chapters and change it or like rewrite them. You can go back and fix what's in there and be like, okay, this is how it needs to go instead of how I plotted it before.
Yeah, exactly. Also too, like for me, I work very much based off of goals and completing tasks and checklists. So breaking it down into those smaller scenes, it breaks it into bite-sized goals where it's not as overwhelming when I look at, oh, I need to write 90,000 words or whatever. It's like, oh no, I just need to write this scene or this chapter right now. And so then it also kind of gives me a sense of motivation and accomplishment as I get through each of those little pieces of my plot, rather than being overwhelmed by the whole big project, which I think is honestly why it took me so many years to write my first manuscript, because I didn't do this. Yeah. And I just couldn't focus it. And things were just meandering, and I had so many plot holes. Not to say I don't still have plot holes, but I can fix them better, I feel like, and I see them sooner because it is all outlined.
Yeah, so this is definitely just personal preference, what works for you, and we're gonna hopefully kind of give you a little bit of an overview of how we do it to kind of help you to maybe apply that. So that's gonna be within like the next few episodes. We're gonna talk about really basics today, and then just kind of dig in a little deeper.
And we'll also have a guest author come on to talk about how he plots his novels.
Just insanely helpful.
Yes.
That's insane. But yeah, definitely don't feel pressured to do this, but I definitely want to say give it a chance and see if it works. And if it doesn't, and you're still going crazy trying to figure out how to work your story, try different ways, try something different, change it around a little bit.
So we'll start with the 3-act plot structure, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. Amy, if you want to describe that one.
So there's different types of plot structures, right? And they all kind of serve a different purpose.
They all have very similar points too.
Yeah, and they can be, I don't know. What we've done is we kind of mold them together.
Yes, and we'll talk more about that later too.
Yeah. So, but the 3-act structure has three different acts. First act is setup, second act is confrontation, and the third act is resolution. Within that first act, you have the introduction to the story. So like learning the world, understanding your character, what they want. And then from there, you just kind of have a pivotal plot point that leads you into the rising action, where things just start to get amped up. They get amped up, stakes are getting raised, and then you have another plot point that takes you up to the crisis that's in Act 3, which is your big pivotal point, and then your following action.
Which kind of leads into that resolution.
Yeah, so just super basic, super can help you if you're at the beginning and you want to just get a very general overview of where you want your story to be. This is very helpful because you can just kind of say, okay, this is what's going to happen next, and this. Just 1, 2, 3.
Yep. So the next one we're going to talk about is the 7-point story structure or plot structure, which the 7 different points are the hook, the first plot point, the pinch point 1, midpoint, pinch point 2, second plot point, and resolution. However, and like a lot of those sound very similar to the 3-act structure, except for when you're doing the 7-point story structure, You actually start with your resolution. So you think of your ending before you think of those opening images, which I know a lot of people like to write chronologically, so that might be really difficult for you, but it kind of, you could bounce back and forth in your story. You think of your resolution point and then the hook, because they should be mirroring each other, which your hook can also be referred to as like that setup, that introduction, that inciting incident, what gets the story kicked off. But they should mirror each other. And then you'll return and you'll do, okay, you're going to look at your second plot point, which is kind of that crisis moment a little bit and leading into the finale. And that should also mirror the first plot point. So these are like big action sequences that are happening, or just results of problems the characters might face. Sometimes it's not like it might be like Harry getting his letter and going to Hogwarts for the first time, or like Katniss getting drawn for the Hunger Games type of things, right? And then after that, you decide your 2 pinch points, which is kind of the moments where things get worse for your characters. Yeah. The pinch point 2 is definitely also referred to in other plot structures as like the bad guys closing in. It's when things start to go wrong for your character before the falling action into the resolution. And pinch point 1 is kind of like the things either going wrong or some challenges they're facing before they're faced with that midpoint and that crisis and that reflection point.
Yeah. I love, just really quick, I love the term pinch point, because
Yes.
I feel like it is just a pinch.
Yeah.
Like it makes your character just a little uncomfortable. You you put them in an awkward situation where they have to face their need and their want, and it just makes them uncomfortable. And that's kind of the goal for that, is just to make them uncomfortable, see how they resolve it, and then they move on.
Yeah. It's like in any heist story, you know, it's like the first little thing that goes wrong with the plan before they have to resolve a little bit more. It's not like the whole thing falling apart, but it's like, oh, this is kind of like a little snafu in the plot. That,
Just like
a
hint to something later, or just like a little, this is gonna come back to bite you if you don't resolve it now, and then they don't resolve it. And
But I do love the 7-point structure, just because it does have some of those main beats you need, and it does require you to bounce back and forth and to really think about, okay, what's my resolution first? What's the hook? And mirror it as you work your way into the midpoint, which is one of the most pivotal points in the novel.
Yeah, so the last one that we want to talk about, and we're going to dig really deep into this one in the next 2 episodes, is Save the Cat. So just as an introduction, we've talked about Save the Cat before, but I wanted to say what it is. So it's a book by Jessica Brody. Originally, it was a screenplay book that Blake Snyder wrote just for those that were screenwriters. And it's a structure book, just to help you understand structure of story. And Jessica Brody loved the concept so much, she felt like it applied to writing a novel. And so she went and wrote Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And the name, where it comes from, Save the Cat, is about how sometimes it's hard to write a character that has anything you like about them. So you have your character save a cat. And from there, you can actually like your characters. So that's kind of where the name came from.
That's cool. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. So, but the structure of Save the Cat gets even more detailed from the 7-point plot structure. And for me personally, it has been a huge help to help me understand the progression of my story and the progression of my characters, especially because she digs into how your characters, how the events of your plot match with your character's development in each of those points. So
yeah, I feel like we've kind of also, we wanted to ask the question, which plot structure do you prefer to use and why? I feel like we kind of answered that. You talking about Save the Cat and how it really like helps you get into your characters, and me with the 7-point plot structure, because you do start with the resolution, which for me, I write all over the place, and it's easier for me to think of an ending before anything else.
Yeah.
But having all of these plot structures can be really helpful, especially to help you fill plot holes. Because sometimes when you're writing, if you're pantsing or if you've plotted out, there might be something off about your story, or you might feel like this doesn't seem to quite flow, or maybe this part feels slow or longer. So it kind of like when you look at pacing and the story as a whole, if you take it back to any one of these plot structures, you can be like, okay, this is kind of where I'm at in my story. What should be happening? Like if you're in the middle, right, you might be in what Save the Cat would be calling the fun and games, or 7-point plot structure calls pinch point 1, or the rising action for the 3-act structure. If maybe things aren't getting challenging for your character, or there's not enough testing them, you might notice that, hey, maybe I need to like throw in a pinch point there, or I need to throw in a couple more obstacles so it rises to that midpoint. Maybe you're not working towards that goal like you should be.
I love that. Yeah, it just helps you to just understand how to structure things a little better and fill in what you're missing, just like what you said.
Yeah, but as you can see too, like the more you study them, the more you'll see similarities. So off the top of your head, Amy, what can you think of that are similarities between all of these plot structures? Because I know we've kind of named a few, but...
Yeah, so I feel like definitely one of the big things is the inciting incident. That definitely needs to happen in each plot structure. And so, like you have between your hook and your first plot point needs to happen.
Can also be referred to as like the catalyst in some of these.
Yeah, the catalyst and the rising action, like it kind of is what gets it started. The inciting incident always has to be there. And then another one would be just the rising action. I feel like when it comes to like Megan said, when it comes to Save the Cat, the fun and games part is how she defines like the premise of the book, just kind of the things that happen along the way as they're trying to solve the solution.
It's the back and forth obstacles kind of thing. It's that pinch point 1, or the main plot point as things move towards the goal or what the character thinks is the goal in the midpoint. So I mean, they're all really similar and they overlap, which honestly, it's hard to write with just one. Though for this week, I would challenge you, even if you're a pantser, to take a look at these plot structures and just overlay them over your story and see where it kind of already naturally does that, or if you've plotted it, how it fits into that, and if your story is actually sticking to that structure, or if it isn't, is there something you could change that might fit it, that might make it better?
Yeah. And like, I mean, pick one of these structures just so that you can kind of make it simple. But if you feel like it would help to kind of pull from a different one too, definitely do that. But start out with just one. I know there's a lot and there's a lot of options and a lot of suggestions on how to do it, but just pick one.
And I know like a common misconception might be when you're writing is that you don't want to write what's been written before. And so that might be why some people shy away from plot structures a little bit, because they want to do something different. They want to break the mold, which you can, but you kind of want to like break the mold while staying in it a little bit. Just because we do gravitate towards stories that naturally have these elements in them. And it obviously doesn't have to fit them 100% of the time. But this kind of flow will just help you navigate your story to make the most impactful story for your readers.
Yeah. And I mean, write whatever story you want to write. If you don't want to follow it, you can totally do that. But if you're striving to make your novel something that's cohesive and helping your character to build and to grow, then these are the most helpful.
And I think too, though, you'll probably be surprised if you haven't used one of these, how much your story already just naturally follows it, because we have been around storytelling and it's so ingrained into our society, and this is kind of the structure,
Yeah, this is just kind of what we know. So again, our challenge is to pick one and give it a shot and see how it works and
see how it applies to what you've already written.
Yeah, and please tell us about it. Find us on Instagram, and we're a writer's survival guide. That's our Instagram name, and tell us about it, how it goes.
Yeah, or if you find a new way of plotting that you think would be helpful to share, let us know.
Yeah.
But thanks for listening, because if you're drowning in words, then so are we, and you might as well not do it alone.
Have a good week.